Ghostly tales, yet mirrors of human life. Hey everyone! Welcome to Encountering Chinese, Ghostly Tales from Zhai. Today, I'm going to tell you two short stories. The first story is titled The Giants. Once, a scholar named Li Jijun from Changshan County was traveling to Qingzhou when he encountered 6 or 7 men. Based on their accents, they seemed to be from Hebei. Upon closer inspection, he noticed that each of them had scars on their cheeks, as large as copper coins. Feeling curious, Li Jijun asked if they had suffered from some illness. They explained that last year, they had traveled to Yunnan. One evening, they lost their way in the dark and accidentally wandered into a mountain. The valley was deep, and the cliffs were steep, leaving them unable to find a way out. In the valley stood a large tree with branches several feet long, drooping down and covering an area of about an acre. Since they had nowhere else to go, the men tied up their horses, unpacked their belongings, and rested under the tree. In the middle of the night, they were startled by the constant howling of tigers, leopards, and owls. Clutching their knees, they sat face to face, too terrified to sleep. Suddenly, they saw a giant approaching. The giant was over 10 meters tall. They were so frightened that they huddled together on the ground, hardly daring to breathe. The giant came up to them, grabbed one of their horses with his hand, and put it in his mouth. In no time, all 6 or 7 horses were eaten. The giant then broke off a long branch from the tree, grabbed the men by their heads, and skewered them through their cheeks, stringing them up like fish. After stringing them, the giant took a few steps, but the branch snapped under the weight of the men with a crisp sound. Fearing they might fall off, the giant bent the ends of the branch and weighed them down with a large stone before leaving. After a while, the men believed the giant had gone far enough, so they took out their knives, cut the branch, and, despite their injuries, fled quickly. But after walking only a short distance, they saw the giant returning with another, even larger, giant. Terrified, the men hid in the bushes. The second giant was much larger than the first. The 2 giants searched around the tree as if looking for something but couldn't find it. They let out a sound similar to a bird's chirping, as if angry. The second giant, apparently enraged by the first giant's deception, slapped the first giant across the face with his palm. The first giant bent over, submitting without a word of protest. After a while, both giants left. After everything had ended, the group hastily fled. They ran through the desolate mountains for a long time before they saw a distant light on a mountaintop. They all ran toward the light. When they got closer, they saw a man living in a stone house. They rushed into the stone house, knelt in a circle before the man, and told him of their recent ordeal. The man helped them up, let them sit, and said, "Those creatures, eating both humans and animals, are especially hateful, but I can't deal with them myself. When my sister returns, we can discuss the matter with her." Soon after, a woman came in from outside, carrying 2 tigers on her shoulders. She asked why the guests had come. The group knelt down again, explaining what had happened. The woman said, "I've long known that those two creatures often cause trouble, but I didn't expect them to be this vicious and stubborn. Now, it's time to get rid of them immediately." With that, the woman took out a copper hammer from the stone house, which appeared to weigh 300 to 400 pounds, and disappeared out the door. Meanwhile, the man began to cook the tiger meat to treat the guests. Before the meat was even fully cooked, the woman had already returned. She said, "When they saw me, they tried to escape. I chased them for dozens of miles and managed to break one of their fingers before returning." As she spoke, she threw the finger on the ground, and it was as thick as a human thigh bone. The group was terrified and asked for the woman's name, but she didn't answer. A while later, the meat was fully cooked, but the group's wounds were still too painful to eat anything. The woman applied a medicinal powder to their wounds, and the pain immediately stopped. At dawn, the woman escorted them back to the large tree where their belongings were still intact. They each carried their belongings and walked for another 10 miles, passing the spot where the woman had fought with the giants the night before. She pointed it out to them, and they could still see large traces of blood in the stone pit. The woman didn't leave until they had exited the mountains, at which point she bid them farewell and returned. The second story is titled Xiang. Xiang, courtesy named Chu Dan, was a native of Taiyuan in Shaanxi. He had a deep bond with his elder half-brother, Xiang. Xiang was intimately involved with a courtesan named Boss, and the two had privately made a marriage pact. However, due to the high price demanded by Boss's madam, the marriage could not be fulfilled. At the time, the madam was considering retiring from the business and planned to send Boss away. Coincidentally, a certain young master Zhuang had taken a liking to Boss and wanted to redeem her to make her his concubine. Boss said to the madam, "Since we both want to escape this sea of misery, it's because we want to leave this hellish life behind. If you let me become someone's concubine, how is that any different from being a courtesan? I hope you will honor my wishes. I want to marry Xiang." The madam agreed and conveyed Boss's intentions to Xiang. Xiang, who had lost his wife and had not yet remarried, was naturally delighted. He used all his money to marry Boss and brought her home. When young Master Zhuang heard of this, he was furious that Xiang had taken the woman he desired. When they happened to meet on the road, Zhuang berated Xiang harshly. Xiang, unwilling to back down, retorted. Zhuang then incited his men to beat Xiang with short sticks until he was on the verge of death. Only then did they leave. When Xiang heard what had happened, he rushed to save his brother, only to find that Xiang had already died. Overcome with grief and rage, Xiang wrote a petition and went to the county seat to seek justice. However, young Master Zhuang bribed the officials, and though Xiang had a just cause, he could not obtain justice. Xiang, filled with pent-up anger and frustration, resolved to ambush and kill Zhuang. Every day, he carried a sharp blade and hid in the bushes along the mountain road, waiting for his chance. As time passed, Xiang Gao's plan was leaked. Zhuang, upon learning of it, began to travel with increased security whenever he went out. Zhuang had heard of a man named Xiao Tong from Fenzhou, a brave and skilled archer, and he hired him for a large sum of money to serve as his bodyguard. This left Xiang Gao with no opportunity to strike, but he continued to wait for Zhuang every day. One day, just as Xiang Gao had hidden himself in ambush, a sudden torrential rainstorm hit, drenching him completely and leaving him shivering from the cold. After the rain, a fierce wind swept across the land, followed by hail. Strangely, Xiang Gao no longer felt the pain or itching in his body. There was a mountain temple nearby, and he struggled to his feet and rushed towards it. Inside the temple, Xiang Gao saw a Taoist priest sitting there. This priest had previously begged in the village, and Xiang Gao had often given him food, which led to them becoming familiar with each other. Seeing that Xiang Gao's clothes were soaked, the priest handed him a cloth robe, saying, "You should change into this for now." Xiang Gao put on the robe, but like a dog suffering from the cold, he could only squat on the ground. Suddenly, Xiang Gao glanced at himself and discovered that yellow fur had grown all over his body. Before long, he had completely transformed into a tiger. When he looked again for the priest, he found that the priest had vanished from the temple. Xiang Gao felt both shocked and angry, but then he had a sudden thought. If I capture my enemy in this form, I can devour his flesh. This plan is brilliant. With this in mind, Xiang Gao returned to his original hiding spot on the mountain, only to find his own dead body lying in the grass. He then realized that he had frozen to death earlier. Worried that his body would be eaten by crows or eagles, he remained by his corpse, unable to leave. The next day, young Master Zhuang passed through the area. The tiger leapt out, knocked Zhuang off his horse, and bit off his head, swallowing it in one gulp. Xiao Tong immediately shot an arrow at the tiger, hitting it in the belly. The tiger collapsed to the ground and died instantly. Meanwhile, Xiang Gao, lying in the thicket, suddenly awoke in a dazed state. After another night, he found that his stiff limbs could move again, and he sluggishly returned home. His family, worried because he hadn't returned home for several nights, had been growing anxious. When they saw him at the door, they were overjoyed and surrounded him, asking him endless questions. However, Xiang Gao simply lay there, and when he spoke or moved, it was slow and lethargic. Not long after, Xiang Gao's family heard of young Master Zhuang's death, and they eagerly gathered around his bed to tell him the news, excited to celebrate. It was only then that Xiang Gao spoke up, saying, "The tiger that devoured Zhuang was me." He then recounted his strange experience. As this story spread, young Master Zhuang's son, deeply pained by his father's tragic death, grew to hate Xiang Gao even more after hearing it and took the matter to the authorities. However, the officials found the story too bizarre and, lacking solid evidence, chose to ignore it. At the end of the story, the author adds a comment. He says, "Looking back through history, most brave men who died to achieve their ideals could not return alive, which has been a source of regret for centuries. Who would have thought that Jiao Tong killing the tiger would unexpectedly bring Xiang back to life? The Taoist priest's magic was indeed mysterious. Yet in the real world, there are too many outrageous things, and those who suffer injustice remain only human. Even if they take revenge, they cannot escape punishment. I truly hope that those poor souls might one day have the chance to turn into tigers too. Alright. That's all for today's ghostly tales, the giants and Xiang Gao. If you enjoyed these stories, please give us a like and subscribe. Please also encourage everyone to comment and share more. We'll see you in the next episode.